Should I start now? Yeah, I guess we're a little after, so I'm going to start. Hi, everybody. I'm Kate Waldhauser, for those of you I haven't met. And this session is called Picking a Path for Automated Workflows. And yeah, I realize it's a very broad topic. And since I have 30 minutes here, I'm gonna give you a real whirlwind. But no, it's gonna be great. So a little bit about me. I've been working in FileMaker since 4.0, and I am up to date on my latest badges. I'm excited about those. I represent Portage-based solutions. We are a Claris Platinum partner based in Seattle. We have a really great team of developers all over the United States. I'm also a member of the Claris Partner Council, so happy to be a contact or liaison for anybody out there. And okay, this term, Texifornian, I love this term, but for those of you that don't speak English as a native language, this is not in the dictionary, but I'm originally from California, San Francisco. I currently live in Texas, so I refer to my family and myself as Texifornian, so feel free to use that if you want to. I really like to acknowledge people before I start a presentation because I might be the one up here speaking, but you know, I didn't do all this by myself. I have a brilliant team of developers, project managers, staff at Portage-based solutions. Like I said, we recently became a platinum partner, although we've been around for 17 years. No, more than that. I've been with Portage-based for 17 years. We also launched a FileMaker podcast this year, and it's called FileMaker DevCast, and currently our largest, according to our statistics, our largest group of listeners is coming from the UK, which I find very interesting, so happy to have anybody else tune in wherever you find podcasts. WIT FM, I know there was a shout out at the beginning of this, beginning of this conference, but I really want to say again how appreciative I am of that organization. That's what inspired me to be here to speak today. And Claris Beyond is a user group that I'm a part of, that I co-run with some other people, and we have a lot of international people be a part of that and join in. It's held once a month over Zoom, and we talk about taking Claris Beyond. That has to do with third-party integrations, and I invite everybody to join. I'll put up the link at the end so you can scan that. Okay, I'm gonna jump in now. So what's up ahead? First, I'm gonna talk briefly about the evolution of workflow automation. I'm gonna talk about the poll results. For those of you, I know a lot of people here filled out a poll that I posted in Slack that has to do with workflow automation. I'm going to define the ideal automated workflow based on the results of that poll. I'm going to then show you how I designed a workflow, again, using the results of the poll. And I'm gonna analyze the options. That's how I went through and built the flow 3 different ways with 3 different products to show you the differences. And that's a picture of my cousin in Alaska hiking. Okay, evolution of workflow automation. So I use ChatGPT to help me define workflow automation. This is the first definition. It is the use of technology to streamline and automate repetitive tasks in a business process, reducing errors and improving efficiency. That's a pretty good response. Then I wanted a little humor, so ChatGPT said, it's like having a team of tireless robots that take care of all the boring stuff so you can focus on the fun and creative parts of your job. I personally like that definition better. It's up to you. I'm sure we could come up with a lot more definitions. Okay, so here's my brief evolution of workflow automation. And now my slides are going on their own, although I didn't program this. So here we go. Everybody's familiar with the Gantt chart, 1910. These guys were the founders, some of the early people that started talking about, you know, process optimization. And so those are, you know, when we, you know, this is before computers, of course. In the 1950s, programmable logic controllers, those are what, you know, allow us to see on-off switch. That's early automation. 1970s, SAP's MRP software was released, and of course that's still around today, so that's pretty impressive. 1987, this is what I call the low-code revolution. So right, this is Claris comes about in 1987 because they were really at the forefront of this. In the 1990s, we had the term ERP, internet, web apps come about. In 2007, the term RESTful API was coined. Webhooks in 2007. 2011 was iPaaS. That's integration platform as a service. That's like a Zapier, if anybody's familiar with that product. And more of the software, the SaaS products out there were having their own internal automated feature set within it. So I first noticed it in MailChimp. I was like, MailChimp has journeys. Oh, journeys are like workflows. Okay, so I'm using Claris Connect. I started the first Claris Connect user group, which is now Claris Beyond. But then I thought, well, what if I were to use journeys, and how would that differ? And how could I navigate and create these workflows, perhaps with using these other products? But noticing that, FileMaker is always at the center of it, because at the heart of it, every solution I work on has FileMaker incorporated with it. I'm not, and perhaps, this would be a good question, are people designing workflows out there without FileMaker in it? So I was asking myself this question, I just get really curious. I'm like, what can I do with these tools? So this is when I wanted to conduct this survey. So I developed this survey, and I wanted to send it out to the community. So I drew up 11 questions. I put them into Jot form, and I started emailing this around to my network, posting it on Slack. As I said, I was really grateful to the people in this room that helped me compile those results. These are some of the statistics that Jot forms gathered for me. So there were 181 views. There were 66 responses. An average completion time of 3 minutes and 53 seconds, which was great because I told people it would take them 5 minutes or less. And here you can see I got results from people all over the world, which I really love because we need an international perspective. Okay, who took the poll? I asked people about their role and who they were. Most people that took the poll considered themselves a professional developer, although you could choose one or more categories as well. So then second was business owner. And then I wanted to know how experienced people were with workflow automation. Here, I was seeing very diverse results, so some people considered themselves advanced, beginner, and intermediate. So this is where, I just don't want to go so fast. Come on, slides. Okay, so this is where I really wanted to know about when people are choosing a platform to develop their automations in, what were the most important factors? And this is where it came up with ease of use as the most important, followed by security. Okay, next slide. I also wanted to know, well, what is your current preferred platform? This was, obviously strikingly FileMaker, which makes sense. We are FileMaker developers. That's what we're used to. That's the way we're going to look at things. But you could see some people are using Claris Connect. Some people are looking at other products. Now this question, I just was very curious about what are the goals when you create workflow automation, right? Because the idea is you're freeing up time. So, or other things, So the top two goals were to streamline day-to-day operations, which of course, right? We're taking repetitive tasks, we're trying to make them smoother, and error reduction, right? So we're trying to automate tasks so that we don't have human error in there. So this was another very interesting point. So I took those facts from the poll, and I wanted to know, okay, if you're designing the ideal automated workflow, it should combine ease of use and security. So I'm trying to aim right for the middle in there. This is a picture of the Bolivian Andes, somewhere in Bolivia, that I took. And right here, you can see, that's the ideal, right? It's sometimes unrealistic. It's way up there, but I'm going to shoot for it. I'm going to try and get as close as I can. But one thing I need to mention, it's only ideal if it's successful, right? Because what's at stake if your automated workflows fail? If you look at some of the common automated workflows, we have invoicing, sales orders, accounting reconciliation, payroll, employee onboarding, staff terminations. Who wants to get an email saying they were terminated? Although it probably wouldn't happen that way, but seriously, like if a workflow automation is to be successful, it needs to be smooth and it needs to really reduce errors. And that isn't the topic of this presentation. I think that's a whole separate presentation, and I know somebody else presented something very important on error capture. but especially in automated workflows where we're taking the super user away, right? We're taking that knowledge out from a person that used to do all these things and used to know the process. We're internalizing it, making it automated. So what could go wrong? I came up with a list of potential errors. Of course, this is not exhaustive, and we've all been there to put out fires. Nobody likes doing that, but the FileMaker file is moved. The webhook fails to send. The webhook is not received. API endpoints are changed, deprecated. Email errors are not sent, not received. FileMaker server goes down. The wrong response is sent. The API outage or downtime. So there's this is such an interesting topic for me, but one that it's impossible, right, to be perfect in these types of to prevent these types of things. But we try to do our best. So I came up with a new definition of the ideal automated workflow, that it should be resilient and built on a platform that's easy to use and secure. So I'm using the results from the poll and also incorporating. I'm sure I would have gotten the same response from the poll, but didn't ask that question per se. So now I've got a new diagram here, and this is where we're aiming for, the middle of these three bubbles: security, ease of use, and resiliency. So what do? Well, we need to think creatively. If we go back to that, if we go back to that thought that I had at the beginning, right, where I'm looking at these different SaaS services and their integration, embedded iPaaS within that, I wanted to say, well, what would happen if I built an embedded iPaaS, or use the embedded iPaaS? So there were a lot of varieties there, but most people, it seemed like one of the more popular was using Microsoft Outlook. Microsoft 365. So I decided I would build an order management workflow integrated with MS Outlook. And this is a description of a general order management workflow. You can see there's a lot of parts to it. There's the receiving the order, fulfilling the order, the post-delivery, and there's a lot of steps that go into these types of automated workflows. For this presentation, I wanted to focus strictly on the post-delivery process, the post-delivery workflow. So this is the diagram of the workflow I was going to build. When the order was delivered to the customer, I would do three things. I would update the status and log it in the database in FileMaker that I was using for order management, send an email to the customer confirming their delivery of the package of their order, and then 3 days later, send another email follow-up with some type of promotion, right, to build that customer loyalty, to solidify the relationship with the customer. So that's what I wanted to build. And I also needed, for this workflow, I wanted to be able to track when exactly the order was delivered to the customer. So I chose this service, Tracking More. This was not part of the poll results, because I wanted to have a service that had webhooks that could connect with multiple carriers. I'd never actually heard of Tracking More before, but it's a service that has, I don't exactly know the total number, but it's a large number of international carriers of delivery services, so that we can track. So there's DHL and all them out there that I could use, and it has webhooks, and it has that really nice interface that you just saw for tracking the API status, which is also such a great thing when we get those. Okay, so here's my options. I know. These slides. Okay, analyze the options. So these are the apps I picked to compare. Seriously. What is going on? This is so strange. See? A workflow automation, when it doesn't work, you're like, come on. I don't know what's happening. Okay, so you saw the slide there 3 times. Claris Connect, FileMaker, and then I chose MS Power Automate, which was Microsoft's what would correlate to the Microsoft product. Right now, that is not an embedded iPaaS. Like, that is actually a standalone iPaaS service. And so, I don't know what's going on. All right, hang on, everybody. I gotta just give this one more second so that I don't have to do this. Thanks for bearing with me. But that's not where I wanted to start. Okay, thank you. So I wanted to look at MS Power Automate because that's what correlates with Outlook, right? But it's an iPaaS, meaning that you can connect anything with it. But what I find interesting about these products is, like with Claris Connect, it's ideal if you want to connect Claris. Oh, gosh. Okay, here we go. It's ideal if you want to connect Claris and FileMaker products, whereas MS Power Automate, if you want to be connecting other Microsoft products, that would be the route you might go. Okay, at first glance, what do you think? These are the three different, very good, fast slides. Pause. Okay. I'm so sorry. It's always like this. Okay. FileMaker pros and cons. So, FileMaker, we're looking at, this was the most popular choice that people had, right, for developing their workflows. I think it's partly because we're just so familiar with it, right? We have the full suite of debugging tools. We're going to design our own error capture. One of the downsides might be it's hundreds of lines of code usually. I mean, I don't know precisely, but you're doing a lot of steps. I'm also setting up a server-side script, and in this case, I actually had 2 server-side scripts, right? Because there's no webhook natively in FileMaker, so I had to set server-side scripts to go pull the API to check when the orders were delivered. I couldn't program one script or in my server-side script to wait. You know how I designed the workflow and I said, well, I want to wait 3 days and then continue. I can't really do that in one script that's on the server because it will just time out. So I had to have 2 separate server-side scripts, one that's sending out, doing those first initial steps, and one that's tracking, okay, now 3 days later, now do this and that. So it's complex, right? So just the way I'm trying to automate it with the server, it takes a lot of logic to do that. In Claris Connect, we have webhooks. So, of course, I could just use the webhook that was coming from the Tracking More API that I talked about earlier. And it also has cryptography utilities built into Claris Connect, so I can validate that webhook, because Tracking More has a nice security feature. They send a signature with their webhook, so I could validate the signature. Of course, I have the great FileMaker connector in Claris Connect, so I didn't have to deal with the FileMaker data API. It's like, that's all built in there, so it's very quick to set up. I have the wait utility, so I could have one flow running and it could wait for 3 days, and I could have multiple flows running concurrently. It's easy to read. You can see here, it's just one straight line of steps here. And also, Claris Connect auto parses your JSON. That's part of exactly the crucial way it works, is when these steps come through, your JSON is automatically parsed, and so I don't have to do that manually. And in MS Power Automate, we've got some nice features. There was the feature to be able to do schema validation on my triggers. So when I had that payload coming in from the webhook from Tracking More, I could validate the schema, make sure that was what I was expecting. It also has features for secure inputs and outputs. But I found that the flow, with the way it was designed, it was difficult for me to read because it ended up being a lot more steps than I wanted, and I couldn't drag these objects over here in the graph. I couldn't drag them and move them around, so sometimes the lines were overlapping. It wasn't really self-documenting because it was difficult to understand. There were some nice on-error capture options with MS Power Automate that I didn't have in Claris Connect. So after each step, I could choose, to do different actions based on if the step was successful, if it had timed out, if it was skipped, or if it had failed. And that gave me more options in the logic in how I wrote the flow. And also the retry option. So in Claris Connect, when you can specify a setting to retry steps if they fail and if there's an error, but we don't have control over that retry policy. It's automatically set to an exponential policy, I think of 8, And with MS Power Automate, I could specify if I wanted to retry based on an interval, if I wanted to retry based on any exponential number, or just skip retry entirely. And this was another part that was difficult in MS Power Automate. So because I'm using the FileMaker Data API, and I'm using their step called HTTP request, I had to call each API request separately. So first I'm initializing my session, then later on I'm going to perform a find for a FileMaker record ID, and then in between those steps, I actually have to call another step to parse the JSON. So that's not happening automatically. So it ended up that my flow was a lot more steps than I would have rather had it be, and that's part of the reason why it became difficult to read the flow. So now I want to talk a little bit about the send email, because that was one of the key components, right? I'm designing this flow, and I'm wondering, well, if I'm trying to work with Microsoft Outlook send email, what's going to be easier, FileMaker, Claris Connect, or MS Power Automate? So when you're designing in FileMaker, you're using the MS Graph API, which of course is very robust. I didn't count the exact number, but just a plethora of number of properties. So when I'm making my API request to generate that email message, I had, limitless options of whatever the API was providing me. In Claris Connect, we have the options to the basic, so when you're setting up your flow, you can specify the body, subject, to, a few of the other basics. But also one of the other options was that I could send a red receipt request. So that was one of the options for Claris Connect. And then in MS Power Automate, I was expecting there to be more features, of course, because this is the Microsoft product, Microsoft Outlook, they should be built into there. And there were. So I could edit the HTML of the body of the email directly within the interface. So that was nice if I wanted to do that. I could also include a BCC, attachments. I could include attachments. I could specify who I wanted to send as. I could specify the sensitivity. I could specify the reply to, the input options. That was another one which was kind of neat for anybody that wanted to send an email and have the addressee be able to respond with and select an option. I could send from a shared mailbox, and I could also change my connection. So in Claris Connect, I'm setting up when I authenticate and use my set up my flow using the MS Outlook connector. I'm specifying which account I want to use, and in MS Power Automate, I could switch between accounts more easily. So that was comparing the factors with the send email. Now, I also wanted to look at those other two factors, right? Security and ease of use. So I'm using some symbols here to show you my interpretation of security in FileMaker. With authentication, of course, we are responsible for securing those tokens, passwords, whatever type of authentication. We need to make sure we are using best practices to take care of that, so nobody's handling that automatically. In permissions, I'm using the FileMaker permissions or extended permissions so that I can manage who has access to that solution, and therefore the scripts and all the pieces in it. It's also using SSL, HTTPS, of course. Cryptography, there's a great number of cryptography functions, which are really wonderful and necessary if you're using API integrations that have those types of signatures that you need to encrypt or decrypt. And there's no built-in compliance with FileMaker unless you're using FileMaker Cloud, of course. And logging is also a really important part of security, to know what's happening in your system. And again, you're going to be responsible for creating your own log, although there are server-side logs and script logs that help as well, but mainly it's on you to build that. So with Claris Connect, things are a little bit different. The authentication, and that's one of the beauty of Claris Connect, right, is that when you add a new connector, you're just signing in. Sometimes it depends on the type of authentication, but sometimes you're just signing in with your OAuth credentials, and then that's it to connect the account. So we're relying on Claris, Cloud or Claris Connect services for that. For permissions, the permissions of who has access to the Claris Connect are managed through Claris ID. So we've got user and team manager. Those are the only two permission sets as of right now. So again, I kind of thought, okay, it's there, but maybe a little bit something is missing. SSL, cryptography utilities, I mentioned. I think those are really critical for building strong workflows, secure workflows. Compliance, we know that Claris Connect has SOC 2 compliance, so you can rely on that if you need to demonstrate security to a client. And logging, it has built-in logging of every flow and steps, and it keeps a 30-day history, so you can always go back to that if you need to. In MS Power Automate, we've got authentication, very similar to how it works in Claris Connect, so that the authentication is all happening internally. Permissions, there's three types of privileges: owner, user, run only. And I think there's a little bit more flexibility in how you set those permissions up. This was the big thing for me. There was no cryptography. I could not use the webhook that came from Tracking More if I wanted to be able to validate that webhook, validate the signature. I couldn't do it. I mean, I'm sure there would have been another way, maybe, I don't know, of figuring out, like, maybe there was another plugin or another adapter or something I could have used, but nothing natively. Compliance, Microsoft has a very impressive compliance list for that product. So and I was using Microsoft Automate Cloud. I should specify that as well. There is a desktop version. I was using Cloud. And they do keep permanent logging of all the flows there. So that's another great thing for security. So here's a really nice summarized way to look at these and how I measured the different security options between the three platform products. Ease of use, I'll go through these. So I wanted to look at these factors, how easy is it to learn? I think FileMaker it's easier of one of the products out there, but API integrations tend to be advanced skills. You need to know, with authentication especially, you need to know curl. You need to be comfortable with communicating with APIs. Although we do have add-ons and reusable code, which I thought was really beneficial because you could find an add-on out there or some piece of reusable code, assuming that it's well written, and then reuse that. This is the most flexible of all the options, right? We have a high level of flexibility in FileMaker so that we can make it do what we want it to do. There is no versioning, so there's no rollback. So again, you're going to be responsible for saving backups of your code, or of layouts, of whatever it is that you might need in order to say, oh, I need to roll back to a previous version of whatever I developed. But FileMaker is easy to duplicate. So you can duplicate steps, scripts, layouts. It has that going for it. And I consider, we have really great debug tools in FileMaker. So Claris Connect, easy to learn. I gave it a green check because it really is. I find Claris Connect the easiest on the platform to learn. With authentication, again, you don't really need to know anything about authentication except follow the directions, put the inputs in where they belong, and hit OK. Custom connectors, again, that's the more advanced skill set, but if there's a connector in there that you don't have, that you don't see as a built-in connector, you can create one yourself. There's a little less flexibility because we're relying on the logic and the tools built into Claris Connect already. So it has a much simpler interface, but fewer options. The versioning is very nice. So you can roll back to a previous version of your flow pretty easily, and it saves, I don't know exactly the number. It seems to be limitless at this point, but I don't know precisely on that. So that's a nice feature for developers. It's very easy to duplicate steps or flows, And it has pretty good debug tools. You can test one step at a time, which is sometimes nice. But you don't want to test your entire flow. You just want to test one step of it. So then I looked at MS Power Automate. Here, I thought easy to learn. Yes and no. It does require a pretty thorough knowledge of JSON in order to integrate with FileMaker. Because I was using the FileMaker Data API, I had to give it sample payloads in order to teach it and train it how to read, what to expect. So it required some advanced skills. The authentication, similar to Claris Connect, you don't need to know anything really about security, except I guess when you're connecting with FileMaker Data API, because I did need to know how to authenticate there. There are custom connectors in MS Power Automate. I have not used those yet. Flexibility, it's a pretty, there are a lot more options than Claris Connect, I found, but it was a more complex interface. It's a little harder to navigate and learn. There's no versioning, no way to roll back, which was a real bummer when I needed to roll back and I didn't. I can't duplicate steps in MS Power Automate, which was not great too, because sometimes it's like there was a lot of detail and a lot of settings, and I just wanted to say, no, I want to run this again. And debugging, I couldn't debug one step at a time, so I had to keep running my entire flow when I wanted to debug it, which also wasn't great. So here's my chart again, looking at the ease of use variables and what I was comparing between each of these platforms. So I'm going to bring this slide up again. Here we go. We're back at the beginning. Have we hit the ideal automated workflow? And in my opinion, I have to give a subjective analysis, right? Because nothing is perfect. There's not really the perfect solution out there. I think people could analyze this month, which is kind of the basic, the one right above free, which for some clients, depending on their number of workflows, is adequate. And MS Power Automate, I needed to use the premium level, which gave me access to the HTTP requests, which runs $15 per user per month. Some other thing that you might rely on to determine how a platform, how solid a platform is the age. How stable is it? So FileMaker has been around almost 40 years now. I think API integrations, people could probably argue this, but roughly 12 years we've been able to integrate with that. Claris Connect is about 5 years old, although I know there was a predecessor to that. And MS Power Automate has been around about 8 years, so that gives you an idea of the legacy of these products. Okay, one more picture here. This is actually in my hometown. This is where I'm from in California. The ideal, right? It's always going to be moving. And I struggled with putting today's date right here on this, because as I keep hearing through this conference, is that this is a rapidly shifting landscape, right? Things are changing all the time. And even with this, I feel like we're going to keep shooting for this mountain, then we get to the top of that, and then we see the one in the distance, and the one in the distance, and the one in the distance. And I just really think it's important that we as developers keep learning about the current tools that are out there, keep understanding the current landscape, but knowing that, it's going to be changing. So these are some fun pictures I had that I took, actually. And, it's really about thinking outside the box. And